And so if my wife's mood is less than optimal on any given day, then I am going to be suffering because of it. And so I'm always just timid around her instead of being attractive, masculine myself and being like, okay, well, you're in a bad mood. Oh, well, it's not going to ruin my day. I still love you anyway. And man, when a guy can learn how to maintain his frame, even when his wife is up and down, that's when he starts the process of rebuilding attraction with her.
Welcome to the Full Fueled Podcast. Welcome to the Full Fueled Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast.
With your host, Matt Tack.
With your host, Matt Tack.
Your host, Matt Tack.
Who are you?
I'm Dr. Alfred Alessi.
Dr. Alfred Alessi.
Dr. Alfred Alessi.
They know by now, bro. They know by now.
I'm going to set what the new normal looks like in my life.
You're not limited by your genetics.
You have a superpower that is lifting people up. Dude, you look big.
The only way we're going to get the word out is with you. Live full fueled. Live beyond limits, baby. Let's go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Full Fueled Podcast. We're without somebody, but we got a great guest on the podcast today. I got Matt Hallock, author, podcaster, and coach. He is an awesome guy. We're going to dig in today. He wrote the book DNA of a Man. You got to go check that out. He also is the podcast host of the Man, Warrior, King podcast. And he runs a coaching program that is just helping guys thrive at the highest level possible in their marriage and the way they interpret and hear from the Father on a daily basis. So welcome, Matt. Looking forward to getting in here.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I love it that we're both Matts too. So it's awesome. I know you're a good guy already because of that. But it's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation and reaching out to me originally. It's good, man.
A lot of Matts in the world. I actually don't know the data behind that, but there are quite a few Matts.
There are, yeah, I know.
So cool. We want to dig in a little bit further. I am a massive book reader. So I want to dig into your book a little bit, the DNA of a Man, and then your story too. But I'm assuming that's a culmination a little bit of what you went through and then why you decided to write the book. But tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, you're right. It is a culmination of some pretty rough years of life. And I wrote it because it was like I had to. I didn't really have a choice internally, I had gone through the stuff that I had gone through, and I had always, from the time I was young, I'd always wanted to do work with the Lord. Originally I wanted to do ministry stuff, and then it kind of morphed, but I've always wanted to basically proclaim a message, speaking, whatever it is, I wanted to do that. And so when my life went through what it went through, first of all, I lost sight of that. I didn't think I'd ever be able to do anything worthwhile. But once I made it through that, I was like, I could not find the help that I needed from Christian sources. I couldn't find it from books about marriage. I couldn't find it from, sermons about being a man or anything like that. They never seemed to scratch the itch that I had. They never seemed to go deep enough or just, they always seemed to miss something. And so I was like, there has got to be other guys out there who need what I needed, but can't find it also. And so that's where the book came from. I was like, there's a massive hole in church world that is not getting filled, and people are not actually truly getting their marriages helped, getting their internal world in order and all that. So that's where it came from. And I wouldn't want to go back through what I did, but at this point, I'm glad I have something to show for it now.
Yeah, that's so true, right? No one would ever want to go back through it, but it's part of your test is your testimony.
Yeah.
And it's the refining of you, and it's what makes your story so cool.
Yeah.
And everybody's story, right? But we very rarely take that time to reflect, and then hardly anybody, right? You're probably in the 1% of the 1% that decides, hey, I'm going to write this thing out.
That might be true, yeah.
I heard from a pastor one time that the shortest pencil is longer than the longest memory. And isn't that so true when you decide to write things out and how that can be passed on? So
yeah,
kudos to you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Let's dive into it a little bit more. You said something kind of pre-show that really hit home and resonated, was this idea of like head, not the tail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how we're like, in maybe today's society, we're losing that type of that alpha in a man in a
Mm-hmm.
in a godly context
Mm-hmm.
of being the head, not the tail, and then almost like elevating the wife where you're walking on eggshells all the time, right? And how that almost is unattractive to her.
Yeah.
So dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that and now I've come to learn, I'm not the only one. There's many men out there who go through life as the tail and not the head. And that's referring to, for anybody who's not familiar, it's referring to Deuteronomy chapter 28, where God is listing out the blessings of obedience followed by the curses of disobedience. And he says, yeah, if you are my people and you're following hard after me and your heart is mine, then my plan for you is that you would live as the head, which means I'm going to be calling the shots. I'm going to be looking around, assessing the situation, deciding what will be and what won't be happening, and not the tail, which is just getting wagged around. And I have no say over my life. I have no say over how good or bad it turns out. I'm just a victim constantly. And I would say that victim is a huge descriptor for what I would live as. And to marry that with the eggshell thing, like, if a guy has this mentality that I am a victim in my life, I'm a victim, and Christians, this is a rough thing for Christians, because we tend to view God in such a way where like he's controlling everything that happens because he's God. So if there's something bad that's going on in my life, it might actually be his will. Hopefully his will for me is that it would be good and pleasant, but sometimes that's not his will. And so we have this understanding that God is controlling everything. So really, I'm a victim of God, and I'm a victim of whether he decides to bless me or not. And so then I'm a victim also of my own brokennesses, my own weaknesses. I can't overcome those things. You show up in different realms of life, in different social situations, looking around, wondering what people think of you. And now I'm a victim of other people's opinions, rather than being on offense and being like, man, I'm here to be a blessing, and those people are lucky to have me here. But then in your marriage, like, you become a victim of your wife walking on eggshells because I don't have the confidence and self-worth to be okay on my own. And so if my wife's mood is less than optimal on any given day, then I am going to be suffering because of it. And so I'm always just timid around her instead of being attractive, masculine myself, and being like, okay, well, you're in a bad mood. Oh, well, it's not going to ruin my day. I still love you anyway. And man, when a guy can learn how to maintain his frame, even when his wife is up and down, that's when he starts the process of rebuilding attraction with her. And it's not always easy, but that it's like a requirement that so many of us don't get.
That's so good. I went to a marriage retreat with my wife. It was something that like was on my radar that I wanted to do. I wanted to invest in my marriage. And there was this concept that was rolled out of when in the Bible, when God speaks that a man is ahead of the woman. In today's world, right, that we have this like very feminist mentality of, no, I got to be equal. I got to be majority or equal to. And in the biblical context, when you like kind of reframe that and really understand the context of it, and as we were walking through it, he was speaking purely in the physical tense of why the man needs to be the head.
Mm.
It's because I have the authority and the physical presence to purely control and dominate my wife.
Mm.
And if I wanted to, I could, but that's why that's such a fragile subject within the context and the biblical realm. And if you're following the Father, is that I could physically destroy her. I have the power to physically destroy her. Most men do. But I also have the power to elevate her,
Yeah.
and to make her feel worthy.
Yeah.
And that level of attractiveness is what you're talking about, as far as whether or not she is in the right mental state, emotional state. I need to vibe with that,
Yeah.
but I need to be above that and be able to elevate her, where she couldn't even. Whereas like most men back down, it's that time of the month again. She's going through something and pushing it off. But it's really seeing it through the lens of what you're talking about. So
Mhm.
I that was something that that really hit with me just even a couple months ago,
Mm.
of how we have the power to destroy, but then we also have the power to lift up.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. So actually that reminds me of a reel that my wife sent me of Jordan Peterson talking about how like a good man needs to be a dangerous man. And then because if he's not dangerous, then his goodness isn't actually a virtue. It's just weakness. Like cuz he can't do anything mean to you anyway. So, there's no value in virtue if you have the ability to hurt somebody. You know what I mean? Like so in order for the good that you have to matter, yeah, you do have to have that kind of strength and ability to do bad to somebody. And so the idea of headship is, and that ability to, yeah, if I wanted to hurt my wife, I could, but I'm not going to. If I can step into that awareness of myself, it changes the game. Because here's the problem with a lot of Christian men is that they actually have a self-perception that they suck, that they are just sinners saved by grace, and that's it. No, they don't amount to much more. Their righteousness is only as good as filthy rags. Like I can't do anything of value. I can't do anything worthwhile. And so they have this perception that there's nothing good in me or about me. And some Christian men don't have that so much, but a lot do, especially the ones that have been in church for years and years and years, growing up with this thinking like, okay, I can't take any glory for anything because nothing good, I can do nothing good and all of that. And so they have that about like that mindset in their theology. And then when you go to get married, you realize there's got to be something off here, because that whole theology and mindset is causing a horribly dysfunctional marriage. And I end up looking towards my wife to be the validator of whether or not something actually is good in me, instead of from a place of already knowing that I'm strong, already knowing that I'm worthy, already knowing that I have value. Then I have emotional surplus to be able to give to her, to pour out for her, to sacrifice for her. And one of the verses that just slammed me when I saw this for the first time was so eye-opening. It's in John chapter 13. And people often quote for marriage in the Bible, they quote Ephesians 5, which talks about husbands, love your wives the way Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And he like washes her with water by his word. So that whole marriage passage really has some like flavors of this place in John, where in John chapter 13, it's where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. And a lot of times people use, husbands washing their wife's feet, like somewhat metaphorically. Sometimes it's even literal. And my wife would never stand for it if I actually literally did that as an act of romance, just saying. But she would be like, no, this is super awkward and it's not sexy. So let's just keep it metaphorical. But people use that a lot. Like husbands, you need to get low, serve your wife, wash her feet, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So in this chapter of John 13, there's a verse that says, Jesus knew that he had come from the Father and that he was returning back to the Father, and he knew that all things had been given into his hands. And then the next sentence says, so he got up from where he was seated, took off his outer cloak, wrapped a towel around his waist, and began to wash his disciples' feet. And I never saw this for most of my life. It was just a few years ago I realized it. I was like, why would he say that this is a cause and effect? That Jesus knew his identity, his worth, his value. He knew how awesome he was, basically. And that's why he chose to get down and serve his bride, his disciples, and wash their feet. And I think a lot of men have been trained or conditioned to try to serve, sacrifice, but they're doing it from a place of internal emptiness where I don't have any of my own value. So I'm washing feet without the precursor that Jesus had. And so when I do that, it becomes needy. I'm actually, if I'm not already filled up for myself, anything I do towards my wife is me looking to get from her my own validation. So what I think I'm doing to love her, it's actually selfish because I'm needing something from her. Mm-hmm. So there's this big gaping hole in so many guys who are trying to love their wives well and who just are missing it because of their own mental lack of well-being on the inside.
That's good. There's a lot in that. How did you transitioning just a little bit here though? Yeah, I love the idea. What you were saying, "A good man is a dangerous man" by Jordan Peterson. And this idea of like building out the podcast and the coaching program, but man, warrior, king, and diving into the warrior piece and the king piece of that all.
Yeah. So as a warrior, you know, the scripture says in one of the Corinthians, it says that Jesus leads us always in triumph. It doesn't say some of the time. And so as a warrior, obviously we wake up on any given day and we have any number of enemies that could possibly step into our battlefield that day, or that we faced yesterday and we know they're going to be there again today. And it's easy when you are lacking an awareness of the full power of the gospel. It's easy to begin to settle for those enemies just being a part of life. And maybe those are my health. Maybe those are my marriage. Maybe those are my money. Maybe it's the state of my kids and they're going off the track or whatever. Maybe it's whatever it is. Any of those enemies of life, we can tend to just begin to settle for them. And that is so stinking unbiblical. You look at God taking his people into the promised land. Their problems came when they didn't obey God by getting rid of all the enemies. They made peace with their enemies, and we tend to do that on a daily basis in our life. We're like, you know what, this is just part of life. Like we were also talking about off the air of guys just saying, well, I'm just getting older, so my body's just breaking down. I'm making peace with that enemy of decay instead of being like, no, I will settle for nothing that is not part of heaven. Because Jesus said, he told us that we were to pray like, God, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So let your kingdom come. And when it does, I want my life to look like it would if heaven were already here. But in order to get that, I have to be able to go to battle. I have to be able to fight for it. And so many of us have this thinking that, like I said earlier, like whatever happens in my life, it must just necessarily be God's will. So I don't fight because I'm under this deception that God wants my life to have these enemies taking up residence with me. So I have to learn what it means to actually fight for the win. And that requires all kinds of stuff, but it really, there's a couple of central things that it requires. One is that I stop letting my expectations for my life be determined by what's normal for people around me. And I stop letting my expectations be determined by how I feel. And I have to anchor my mentality and my beliefs in what God actually says. So for me in my journey, when I was going through health craziness that probably could have killed me, I had to intentionally not let my expectation for the future be shaped by the excruciating pain that I woke up every morning with. I had to be like, you know what? God says that he heals all of my diseases. He says that Jesus bore my sicknesses and carried my infirmities. So I refuse to make peace with this disease. You are an enemy. I will never accept you. And so it's like, it's this, I don't take no for an answer mentality. And from there, we have to basically adopt a vigilance. The scripture says, be vigilant, act like men, always be watchful, because those thoughts, man, the thoughts that we think will either make us or break us. And so a warrior, first and foremost, I think he has to get his mindset right.
That's so good. An imagery that I have of that is and I'll never understand this about football. And I know it varies with, are you a football fan?
I am. I'm not like massive, but I'm a Niners fan. So
Niners fan.
yeah.
I'm not a massive football fan by any, but this is the analogy that kind of came across
Yeah.
of like, when a team's up and they might be close, in the whole game they've been operating in a defensive scheme that worked, right?
Yeah.
They might be throwing some blitzes outside in the line, they might be, but very rarely do they play zone defense and play way back. But at the end of the game, they're playing not to lose the game instead of play to win the game.
Yeah.
And so they'll play this prevent coverage and they'll get really far back and they'll be like, well, maybe we might not lose this game. We might just have it, right?
Yeah.
And that's life, right? Of a lot of people, it's like we don't stay with the, tricking them on their feet of staying with the blitz packages every once in a while or playing man to man.
Yeah.
Instead, we want to go to this zone, coverage that's just that's like a balloon that we're giving up 15, 20 yards.
Yeah.
And that is so much like that in life, is that, we're playing not to lose the game now. So like, what does that look like?
Totally. That's such a great analogy, man.
I always like go back to like, you play to win the game, right?
Yeah.
Like let's play your idea of like, you play to win, right? I'm not playing to lose.
Yeah.
And I'm not playing to even almost potentially not lose. I'm playing to win.
Right.
And how are we winning in that capacity, and seeing it through the lens, that biblical lens that you so eloquently just put it, is just like that's it. Don't go to that zone coverage.
Yeah.
It's still continually blitz, still move forward, where God's calling you and he has an intents and purposes in your life.
Totally.
It's so good. So good for so many men to hear and listen to that. Where now can, where do you want to direct people from here? Tell us a little bit before we kind of sign off here about your coaching program, to maybe even a little bit about your podcast and where you expect that to go in the near future.
Yeah.
Just dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks, man. So, everything kind of started with the book, The DNA of a Man. So if anybody wants to get started with me, I would recommend starting there by grabbing the book. I think it's up to almost like 10,000 copies sold now. And I've had so many emails or comments on Facebook or whatever from guys that are like, man, this book changed my life. And I didn't expect it, but that's how it's been. So that's where I would start. And you can find it at manwarriorking.com/DNA. It's also on Amazon as well. So that book is it's actually the first of a 3-part series. I'm gonna be writing the DNA of a warrior and also the DNA of a king too. But I would start with that. On my website, manwarriorking.com, you'll find a lot of other things too. You'll find coaching information. I do one-on-one coaching with guys. A lot of times they have read my book and they're like, okay, I really need more of this, so I need to get in touch with Matt. And so we will go through a process of mindset renewal, because Romans 12 says you get transformed by renewing your mind. So we'll go through that process and begin to eradicate stupid lies that we're believing and begin to see, okay, I've got to think according to how God thinks. And we go from that into tapping into your desires that maybe watered down over the years. You've ignored them, pushed them out, whatever. We want to awaken these different desires for what you want to see happen in your life. And then we go into reviving your marriage if you're a married guy, which most of the guys who work with me are, but even if not, like there's other stuff we can do. But for the most part, it's like, yeah, my marriage has been really, really painful and I need some kind of help. I haven't found it in the church. I haven't found it from Christian books, whatever. So we end up going into all of that and help you learn how to rebuild attraction in your marriage. So I do that with one-on-one with guys. Every now and then, a few times a year, I offer a group intensive where I take a group of guys through that process as well. But there's other courses and things that I have on my website too. And yeah, like you said, the podcast is another good starting place too for me. So the book and the podcast, it's the Man Warrior King podcast. I'm up to almost 90 episodes now, and the plan for that in the future is to keep building it. I plan to start getting some sponsors going and stuff, and to really get the word out there about it. I have not yet focused on double purposing it for YouTube, but I'm going to be building a YouTube presence there and building that out. So eventually you'll be able to find the full built out YouTube channel as well. So going big places.
I love it, man. And then what are your social handles?
Yeah, it's on Instagram, it's just Man Warrior King. On X, it's Man Warrior King 1. And then that's really the two biggest places. I'm on Facebook as well. You can find me at Man Warrior King too. But those are it. So, yeah.
Thanks for coming on, man. So we have Matt Hallock, as I said, author, podcaster, coach. You got to go check him out. This has been a great episode, brother. I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, man.
Always, we want to thank our sponsors. Number one, Alessi Functional Health, getting you into a pain-free future. Make sure you come check us out. If you're in the Tampa Bay area, we absolutely can get you fully optimized and live a healthier life. Then we have Nutrition Solutions. Head on over to nutritionsolutions.com. Enter code FULLFUELED15 and get 15% on your first order. Great high-protein meals that can give you the optimal day-to-day high-protein balance that you need. Many Americans right now are deficient in protein, so start maximizing your protein with Nutrition Solutions. And Spread Oaks Farms, head on over there. You can get 25% off your first order. Beef, top-notch beef, directly delivered to your doorstep on ice. Put it in your freezer, cook it up. It's phenomenal. It's 1,000 times better than anything you're going to get at the grocery store. But as always, we want to thank you. Share, like, subscribe. We appreciate you listening in today. As always, live full fueled, live beyond limits, baby. Let's go.
Welcome to the Full Fueled Podcast.
I'm going to set what the new normal looks like in my life.
You're not limited by your genetics.
You have a superpower that is lifting people up.
So unfortunately, most businesses aren't going to use the highest quality ingredients.
What's your approach?
Dude's jacked.
I know he's jacked. That's why I'm
I
asking
don't
him
think
how
he
he trains.
I don't think he lifts.
Yeah.
Consistency in everything that we do that really compounds. Only way we're going to get the word out is with you. Live full fueled, live beyond limits, baby.